The topic this evening is billed as finding and keeping your Bashert. And I find that this is a very interesting topic because I'm going to borrow a phrase from Mark Twain. Mark Twain used to say that the difference between right and almost right, the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and the lightning bug. Meaning certain subtle differences can make a huge difference in application. And I think this subject in particular has there's a tremendous misunderstanding from my perspective in terms of what the right approach that a person should have when they're going out in the entire process of the finding the Bashert, the entire shidduch scene. And I think it's a rather subtle sort of mistake. And in fact, as I get into it, I think some people are going to nod their head as well. That's what I'm doing. But I think when we get to the punchline, I think you'll see that it's kind of like the difference between lightning and the lightning bug. So the reason why I give that little introduction is because it's going to take me a little while to get there. So what I'm going to do is deal with the topic first, because I think there's a perspective that's lacking. It'll take me a little while to work on that topic, and then we'll get to the subject of this evening. Let me begin with the following. Avram Avinu was tested with 10 nisyonos. There were 10 major tests that Avram Avinu went through, and he passed every single one of them. However, the Achronim explained to us that the tests were not whether he would or would not do what he was asked to do. Avram Avinu was on the level that Hashem had full understanding. There was no question. If he was commanded to do whatever it might be, there was no question that he was going to do it. The Tosas Yontif explains that the entire test for Avram Avinu was one area, and that is, would he question Hashem? Would he have complete, utter trust in Hashem? Or when Hashem gave him whatever the Nisayan was, would he question Hashem? So the entire test was not whether he would or wouldn't, but rather whether he would question or not. And the Tosas Yontif explains, Amad B'kulam, Avram Avinu passed every one of them. He did not question Hashem. Now that's the background. The problem with that Mishnah, and the Tosas Yontif explanation of that Mishnah, is the Medrash Rabbah that seems to contradict it. Because right after the Akedah, right after Avram Avinu was asked to bring his son, he says to Hashem as follows: Hashem, when you said to me, take your son, your only son, I had a tremendous question. Not only did I have a tremendous question, I had a stira. Because yesterday, Amarta Kebi Yitzchak Yikar Zera, you told me prior that Yitzchak was going to be the progenitor of the Jewish nation. He was going to be the father of the Klal Yisrael. And now you're telling me to shech him. It's a contradiction. It's a total, utter contradiction between two direct commandments from Hashem. And Avram says, I had a tremendous question on what you said, but kavashti as Yitzri, I conquered my nature. I didn't actually ask the question, and therefore in the merit of that, when the children of Yitzchak sin, please conquer your anger with them. And that's the Medrash. And the problem is that Medrash clearly contradicts what the Tosas Yontif says. Why? Because the Tosas Yontif tells us that the entire Nisayan was whether Avram Avinu would have a question or not. Well, the Medrash says not only did he have a question, he had a contradiction. He had a direct stira. Hashem said, Yitzchak is going to be the father of the Jewish nation. Hashem says to shech them. That's a total stira. Avram Avinu is faced with an absolute total contradiction. He has a tremendous question on Hashem. So if anything, according to Tosas Yontif, it would sound like he failed that Nisayan. So here we have that direct contradiction. Again, on the one hand, Hashem says, on the one hand, Avram seems to have this direct contradiction. He has this tremendous question on Hashem. And the Tosas Yontif tells us that Avram Avinu didn't question, and that was in fact the Nisayan. So the question is, what is the answer to this contradiction? So I'd like to spend a moment or two seeing if we could better understand that. And let me explain a perspective for this. The story is told that a nun once stopped the class that she was teaching and called Bobby up to the front of the second grade class and said, "Children, did you hear the question that Bobby just asked? Did you hear the question?" At which point the children said yes. And the nun said, "You know why Bobby asked that question? The devil made him ask that question. Don't you ask questions like Bobby, because the devil makes you ask questions." And in a very religious Catholic school, you're trained from a tender young age not to ask. Have faith, don't question, and that is their approach to religion. As you know, our approach is a tad different. And as a matter of fact, the training in yeshiva is the exact opposite. The training is not only to ask, the training is based on an assumption that if I don't understand it, I'm going to question, I'm going to understand, I'm going to rack my brain to get to the bottom of it. And I've often wondered what it would be like if you'd bring a Catholic priest into a beis medrash. And he would sit there and say, "What are you guys doing?" They argue with everybody. They argue with their mentors. They argue with people older than them. They argue with their Rebbe Kvega. Everything is, how do you know? Maybe it's a carrot. Maybe the opposite. How do you know? But just accept it. Take it on faith. This is what it says. But we don't do that. That's not at all the Masorah. The Masorah is to question. The Masorah is to delve in. The Masorah is to bring my mind to its ultimate understanding and to question everything. However, that questioning is with a certain temperance and a certain caveat. And that caveat became very clear to me when I was learning with a number of years back. I was learning with a young law student who was at the time very inexperienced in learning Gemara. And we'd learn each week. Now his reading skills were very poor, but we'd learned very, very deeply. He was a bright fellow. And I sort of would bridge the gap of the reading, and then we'd get involved in very deep discussions in the Gemara, etc. One point, he says to me, I asked a certain question on a Rashba, and he said, "Well, maybe the Rashba is wrong." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Maybe the Rashba is wrong." I said, "How could the Rashba be wrong?" He said, "Well, last week you said the Ritva is shver, so maybe just like that Ritva is wrong, maybe this Rashba is wrong." Now, I was teaching high school at the time. For 1 year straight, the guys in my high school shir heard this like a mantra. It's not the Rashba that's shver, it's the cup, the head that's shver. Meaning, when I approach a ritva, a rashba, when I break my head and try to understand it and I do not understand it, my presumption is not that I'm right and the rashba is wrong. My assumption is that the Rashba's got it 100% right. I, for whatever reason, am not zocha to delve into the depth of understanding. But it's not that the Rashba is wrong. My question doesn't shlug up the Rashba. It's the head that's problematic. And there's no better proof to this than if you open any daf in Gemara, you'll find many, many Tosasim. Almost all of Tosas asks a question on the Gemara. Many times he'll answer the question, and many times he won't. There are many, many times that Tosas ends with a tzarach in, with a, I don't know the answer, and amazingly, there's another Tosfos following it. Because the presumption is that it's the limitation of my mind, the limitation of my understanding. It's not that the Torah is lacking, it's not that the Torah is wrong, it's not that people greater than I didn't understand, it's that I have the limitation. And that perspective, I think, has to very much couch all of the questions that we ask. We should train our minds to understand, we should train our minds to delve in as much as we can, but at the end of the day, there's a limitation that I recognize. I am but a mortal human being, I know a little bit, and when I have a question, when I have a major, major problem, it's not the Torah that's wrong, it's I who don't understand. And I think this bears just 2 minutes of focusing on, to understand, and you'll excuse me for saying it this way, but understanding the difference between man's wisdom and God's wisdom. And I'll explain to you an illustration of this point. Many years ago, I was walking in Kugon Hills on a Friday night, and I was walking on this side of the sidewalk, and all of a sudden, I don't know how it happened, but in a hairbreadth of a flash of a moment, I was no longer on the sidewalk, but I was smack in the middle of the street. But I didn't walk, I almost like jumped. I found myself many, many feet away. What had happened was, as I'm walking by, I look over to the right, I heard a noise, and I saw a full-size rat. And folks, I didn't walk, I didn't run, I just flew, and I was like very, very distant. And that response is a very interesting response. The fight or flight response in the human is very complex, very involved, and requires a tremendous amount of integration of many different systems. The breathing must increase dramatically. My entire metabolism changes. My blood pressure, my heart rate, the muscles need more oxygen and nutrients, and the body goes into a emergency state. But there are so many complex systems that each have to integrate and each have to go into effect, but I am utterly clueless to them. I don't think about it. I just find myself there in a hairbreadth, in a flash, in an instant. There's an electric sort of shock that takes over, and all of a sudden my body is in this very different hyper alert state, hyper vigilant, and my systems are all on go, and I'm in a very different place. And when you study the fight or flight syndrome in the human, you see one of the wonders of Hashem's world. But that is not the amazing part of that scene. The amazing part of that scene is the fact that in a hairbreadth of time, I understood and reacted. You see, when I heard a noise is a noise. I turned my head and I saw something. But you have to appreciate what happens when you see something. There's a visual image that's taken by my retina, converted into electrical impulses, sent to a part of the brain. Now, as electrical impulses, they're meaningless. There's a part of the brain that then interprets those electrical impulses and says it looks approximately like this. But this has no meaning. This is just some coloring, some dark parts, some lighter parts, but it has no meaning. I then have to interpret what is that image. So within my brain, there are different parts that store different elements. There's a memory part. So my brain accesses the memory section to find similar sights. Don't forget that which I saw, I never saw before. It was darker. I never really studied rats. So I had to search through various parts of my memory to find the similar. Oh, that is not just a this, it's a rat. But here's the next problem. Where am I standing? First of all, if I'm standing in the zoo, I don't have this emergency reaction. Maybe that rat is behind glass bars. Maybe it's Mickey Mouse. So there's an entire thing called context. Not only do I have to access the memory, there's another signal that's sent out to the context part of the brain to interpret where am I standing, what's the time, what's happening. Then the whole is put together. The interpretation, the memory, the context, it's all integrated. The image is rat, emergency, we're in trouble. And then the electrical impulses are sent down to the 4 or 5 different systems in my body to change the metabolism, to change the heart rate, to change the breathing, to change the blood pressure so that I go into emergency hyper overload. I find myself some 20 feet away. Now that's pretty impressive, but that's not the punchline. If you'd like to understand the wonder of Hashem's creation, I believe there's one very simple exercise to do. And that is, go over to a 10-year-old and offer them the following riddle. Here's your choice. I will give you either $1 million, or I'll give you a penny today, twice as much tomorrow, twice as much the day after, and for 30 days I'll keep doubling it. Would you prefer $1 million or a penny doubled for an entire month for 31 days? Which would you choose? And any intelligent 10-year-old will say, what's the question? $1 million, that's a ton of money. I'm not taking pennies, I'll take the $1 million. Of course, if you do the math, 2 to the 29th power is $538 million. Because if you take the penny and double it, and double it, and double it, and double it, by the time you get to the 30 or 31 days, it's now hitting the number of $538 million. Now, the reason why that's relevant is because when you start exponentially multiplying things, what happens is they grow and grow and grow and grow until they hit enormous proportions. Now, why is that relevant? Because, as we all know, the brain is made up of neurons. A neuron is a cell that's rather tiny. You could see it under a very, very powerful microscope. The cell is sort of like a core nucleus, and then there are branches that stick out. Each of the neurons have quite a number of different kind of little, almost tentacles, almost things that stick out, and the pathway of thought, or the pathway of any cognitive process that you go through, starts in a neuron, will go out one of these tentacles, will go connect to another synapse on some other cell. But here's the point. If you have 6 or 7 potential pathways from this neuron, and there are 6 or 7 parts of this neuron that could accept it, do you realize how many different pathways it could take? But the brain is not made up of 2 neuron cells, not even of 10, not even of 100. The human brain is made up of 100 billion neurons, which means that the amount of possible ways that the electrical pathways can go are countless. You can't even imagine the possibilities of how many different ways it can go. Yet every time I'll walk on the street and the pathways are impeccably correct. And when I saw the rat, the brain instantly said, what does it look like? Send out something to the memory section, send out another part to the context section. There were 65 billion different pathways it could have taken, but somehow the electrical impulses knew to follow that pathway, and they knew then to integrate it into the whole. They then knew to send the neuron pathways back down to the body, to send the fight or flight response to get excited, change all the neural responses, and that is a rather frighteningly complex manifestation of Hashem's wisdom. And the reason why it is important for us to, every once in a while, sort of delve into the wonders of Hashem's complex world is because there are certain parts of Emunah that require an understanding of how vastly greater than we is Hashem. And I'll share with you one. The next time you're davening in shul, I want you to think about the following. Here I am, little me, speaking to the Creator of the heavens and earth. I'm having a conversation literally like I speak to my friend. However, I'm also with at least 10 other Jews, maybe even 100, maybe 200. But this isn't the only place where they're davening. If you imagine a Yom Kippur Kol Nidre, there are many, many shuls just in this neighborhood, and there are many, many neighborhoods, and there are many, many cities, and then there are 5.5 million Jews in the United States of America. There are 6 billion people on this planet, and when you understand that Hashem is the mashgiach, the supervisor of the entire planet, what that means is Hashem is involved in every nuance of every activity, of every interaction of the human, because that is what determines life. You begin to recognize that Hashem's presence is something that's very difficult for us humans to understand. And you begin to understand that there's a power that Hashem has, a wisdom that Hashem has that's well beyond our understanding. And sometimes you need chizuk. Sometimes it's difficult to really perceive that. I mean, Hashem is listening to me and my friend and knows their past and knows my past and knows that future and everything at the same moment. How could Hashem hear my conversation and his request and her request? How could it be? But when you begin studying various little tiny parts of Hashem's creations, you begin to see the vastness, the wonder, the wisdom of Hashem, and you begin to start getting it, that comparing me to Hashem can't be done. And I want to give you a mashal because I think this is a very important point. For those of you who are new to a Shmuz, you may not understand this, but a Shmuz is a complex piece of Torah. Usually it starts with an understanding of a chazal, it starts with a question, and then there's a teretz. I will admit the fact that at least one, if not more than one, of these shmuzim was discovered during a major learning session with my son when he was about 5 or 6 years old. We would learn together Chumash, and Shalom Aryeh at the time would start reading. Now you keep in mind, when a 5 or 6 year old starts reading, he's decoding. Nachma, the Beis with the 2 dots is B. The Reish with the 2 dots that way is Rei. The Shin with the dot here is Sh. Bereshis, in the beginning, Bara Elokim Hashem. By the time he's about halfway through the pasuk, I'm bored out of my mind. Hashem Yirachem, what am I going to do? So what I do, as a good father, I listen, nod my head, and I start looking at Rashi. As he's reading, I'm paying attention with one ear to how he's reading, correcting if he makes a mistake, but I'm also looking at the Rashi. Wait a minute, that Rashi, wait a minute, that can't make sense because the Gemara over there. Maybe that, Taka, right? And by the time he's up to about the 3rd or 4th pasuk, I've got a kasha, I got a teretz, and I got myself a beautiful shmuz. Now, what's the difference between Shalom Aryeh, the 5-year-old, and his father? The difference is vast and wide. The difference between his cognitive abilities and mine at the time are so different that we really can't communicate. Because what I'm able to do with just a glance to instantly recognize words without even having to read the letters is beyond his grasp and his understanding. And once you hear that, you can begin to understand that that is just a mushal of the difference between our cognitive abilities and Hashem's. If we are as brilliant as a sun, as smart as a human being could ever be, we don't begin to understand the wisdom, the brilliance, the constant understanding that Hashem has, and much greater than the distinction between a 5-year-old and a developed adult's maturity, much greater is the difference between our understanding and Hashem's. And once you understand that, you can begin to start working on the most difficult things we humans do, and that is trusting in Hashem. I believe that 90% of our emunah problems, 90% of our philosophical issues stem around one single issue, and that is we play God. We play God, and we then have kashas on Hashem. I'll explain to you what I mean. I know exactly what I need. I need this job. I need to marry this woman. I need my kids to get into this school. I need this situation to work out. And for some strange reason, Hashem is just not playing along with the script. I don't get it. I know exactly what I need. This is what I need. And Hashem is just messing me up. I don't get it. I just don't understand why Hashem doesn't just say, you got it right, and I'll give you what you need. But you see, that's the problem. The problem is that we start with the premise that I know exactly what I need, and when Hashem doesn't deliver, there's a kasha. Hashem, why are you doing this to me? It's obvious that this client is the client I need, this job is the job I need. Why are you messing me up? But when you take a step back and you say to yourself, how much do I really know? How much do I know about the future? How much do I know about what I need 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? How much do I know about industries? How much do I know about economies? Whether this part of this sector is going to expand or contract? Whether this industry is going to be great or lousy 5 years from now? And once you take a very different perspective, you have many of these questions just fall away. And when you stop playing God, when you start playing mortal, you have many, many less questions. Hashem is the creator, orchestrator, and maintainer of this planet. And that means that Hashem knows far better than we do what we need. And Hashem has pre-designed many, many situations for our good. And the problem isn't that Hashem doesn't quite get it. The problem is that oftentimes we have a very clear understanding, and that very clear understanding is very, very flawed. I believe that this is the answer to Avram Avinu. You see, Avram Avinu had many questions on Hashem. But there's nothing wrong with having questions on God. There's nothing wrong with saying, I've racked my brain, I've thought about it, and I have an absolute, total contradiction. I don't understand Hashem's master plan. That's not a chesaron, that's not a lack of emunah. Provided there's one step. I understand that Hashem knows better than I. The Rashba isn't shver. The Rashba is not wrong, it's my head that's wrong. The Torah is not wrong, I don't understand the Torah. I have the humility to recognize that I have a limited understanding. I've thought, I've delved, I've worked on it to the best of my ability, but at the end of the day, I don't understand the answer. But that doesn't make the Torah wrong. And what Avram Avinu did when he won this victory was he had an absolute contradiction. Hashem said, Yitzhak is going to be your son. He's going to be the father of Israel. Hashem said, go kill Yitzhak. Avram had a tremendous question. But his response was not, Hashem's wrong. I have a question on Hashem, that is correct. But I'm going to continue on the path. Why? Because my assumption is that Hashem's right and I'm wrong. And that perspective requires some humility, requires some understanding of the wisdom of Hashem. And the biggest chizuk for that is to study the wisdom of Hashem, study the systems that Hashem put into this world, study the vast and integrated, harmonious systems, and say to yourself, this is astounding. The wisdom, the intelligence that's right there in front of me is so beyond my capacity that maybe Hashem is smarter than I. And I hate to be funny about this, folks, but every once in a while I do a little Musar exercise. And I do it just like this. I say, me versus God. Who's smarter? Well, let's think about it. God is the creator of the heavens, the earth, and all that it's contained. Me, I put together the baby swing, and after 2 laborious hours, I discovered that I put it in the swing backwards. Okay. Hashem forgets nothing and is ever conscious of all the facts. Me, by the time I get down to the store, I forget what my wife asked me to get. Okay? Hashem knows the future as if it's the past. Me, I don't remember. By the time I'm finished breakfast, I don't remember what I started eating, and I sure don't remember what I had yesterday. Anybody here, by the way, remember high school geometry? How about high school science? How about Rasputin? Anyone know what the Monroe Doctrine was? Or what about Champlain? Go take some basic high school test today, and you'll quickly see that our memories are quite questionable. And once you delve into that idea and realize that Hashem forgets nothing, knows everything, is ever conscious, totally alert and aware of everything that happens on this planet, you begin to get a sense of humility. You can begin to start trusting Hashem's wisdom, and you end up answering many of the philosophical questions, many emunah questions, because the answer is, I really don't know. Hashem knows what's better for me, and I trust in Hashem that Hashem has a plan. Hashem understands my past, my future, and knows far better than I what is good for me. And that was the way Avraham Avinu approached the situation. I have a kasha, that's not a problem. There's nothing wrong with questioning Hashem, as long as that question remains trusting that Hashem is wiser than I. It's not about blind faith. It's about understanding that Hashem has a much higher level of wisdom than I, and therefore I trust in Hashem's wisdom. Now, let's get to the topic at hand. The topic at hand is finding my Bashert. My wife and I, when we were first married, we did a little informal study. My parents at the time had a close circle of friends, about 8 couples, and we sort of did this informal sort of looking around and studying the dynamics of each couple, because we wanted to know more about this thing called marriage. And the first conclusion that we both reached about simultaneously was that not one of those couples would we have put together. Every one of them was mismatched. She was too smart, he was too frum, she was too sophisticated, he was too loud. They just didn't fit. Not a one of them would we have put together as a couple. And that sort of highlighted for us the following observation. A marriage is not a match of two like individuals. A marriage takes two very different sort of human beings. Different in temperament, different in nature, and different in personalities, but particularly different in the sense that they're not supposed to be similar, they're supposed to be mashlim. Mashlim means that he will have certain strengths and certain weaknesses, she will have certain different strengths and certain different weaknesses, and they fit together like a hand and glove, where her strengths support his weaknesses her strength, and they fit together like a key that has many ups and many downs, hers being exactly matched to his, but not like, not similar, but perfectly matched. And understanding that, I believe, is a fundamental part of understanding what marriage is about. I was a young person when the Yeshiva came into Blatshir one day, and he was literally laughing. And everyone was sort of like wondering why was the Yeshiva laughing. And the Yeshiva said, I can't believe it. Baruch Hashem, we finally found a shidduch for this guy. I thought we'd never find a shidduch. We finally found a shidduch. I mean, at this point, everyone was quite curious what the Yeshiva was referring to. Oh, what a kas, what a temper this guy had. And we finally found the perfect shidduch. Well, now at this point, everyone really wanted to hear who is the perfect shidduch for a guy with a fierce temper. And the Yeshiva explained, we found him a woman with a temper more fierce than his. He opens his mouth, she screams twice as loud, he's quiet, docile as a lamb. The best shidduch couldn't be better. Now, at the time, I reacted, I believe as you're reacting, like, come on, that's about the worst shidduch in the world. Everybody knows that if a guy has a temper, the worst thing in the world for him is to find a woman with a temper, because it's World War III. You're asking to fill the next Gittin session. It's never going to work. Unless you understand that the nature of this man is be'etzim docile. He's not an aggressive, tough guy. At the core of his essence, he's really very, very soft. He reacts, and he's reactive, but when he has a woman who's stronger, he becomes docile like a lamb, and the solution that he needs for his temper is a woman with a stronger temper. You and I would never read that shidduch. But Baruch Hashem, you and I don't read shidduchim. That shidduch was read by the creator of the heavens and the earth, who created his nature, who knew exactly where he was at, and found for him the match. And my friends, I want you to hear very clearly what I'm saying. If you are married for 20 years, and you're an intelligent, observant individual, you have a shot at maybe understanding something about marriage. If you're not sure I'm right, listen to the conversation of newly married couples. I used to listen to the young married cola guys come in. I don't understand what she's talking about. I don't know where she's coming from. Everyone didn't understand their wife. And I imagine the parallel on the wife's side. And it takes an awful long time to begin to understand this concept called marriage, how it works, how it functions, what it's all about. 20 years is about the minimum time, I believe, that it takes to understand marriage. But that's the easy part. You see, marriage, in theory, is easy enough to understand. It's easy enough to work with. In fact, a few shmuzim you can listen to, which may give you a perspective. The difficult part is that it's not an abstract, it's not in theory. It's me finding the match for me. The problem is that to do that, I have to know who I am. I have to understand my inner workings. I have to understand my real drives and motivation. I have to understand what it is that at the core of my essence I need. And to understand yourself with that type of real clarity takes probably about 80 years. But that's still the easy part. The difficult part is after you understand marriage, and after you've studied yourself and really, really know what makes you tick, you have to now find the exact corresponding, again, not similar, but the corresponding like a teeth into the lock, where the mashlim, where the weaknesses are offset by the strengths. You have to go out into the world, search through the 6 billion people, narrow it down to maybe 500,000 from people, and find the one who's perfectly suited for you. To do that would require the wisdom of Shlomo Melech, maybe at the age of 120. And basically, I think what I'm getting at is the fact that if you're going to use your acumen, your wisdom, to find your Bashert, you are guaranteed to fail. It will take you way too long to understand marriage. You ain't going to be married. It's going to take you till about 80 till you understand yourself. And it's going to take another 40 years till you're able to then find the perfect spouse to be the match that you need. Baruch Hashem, it's not our job to find the perfect one. One of the very basic tenets of our religious system is the fact that 40 days before the children are born, Hashem is mezavek zivugim. Hashem says, Bas Ploni, Leben Ploni, this one is matched to this one. The Bashert is before I was born. Hashem has already predestined the one who's right for me. And while that may sound simple, and that may sound obvious, if you listen to the way that most people go out, I don't believe that they buy into that at all. I'll explain to you what I mean. When you hear the shadchan say these words, so tell me, what are you looking for? Out comes the laundry list. Well, I need somebody extroverted, introverted, outward. I need somebody tall, short. I need somebody who's shy, who's funny, who believes in people, maybe the opposite. The person, an entire long list of exactly what I need comes out. There was a guy who's 35 years old who said to my wife, when my wife asked us, so what are you looking for? Well, one of the things on his long list was, I'm changing this slightly, but not that much, a woman with blonde hair. My wife wanted to hit the guy. You idiot. How do you know you need a woman with blonde hair? That's what I need. I believe that most people, when they go out, play Mr. Potato Head. You know the little Mr. Potato Head? You get to choose the size of the lips and the size of the ears and short legs. People do. This is what I need. I need somebody who's tall and short and funny and extroverted, introvert. That's what I need. So they put together Mr. Potato Head. Then they go out into the marketplace and they try to see closest they can possibly find. And they come up empty. I can't find my Bashert. Well, my friends, don't make your Bashert. It's not Mr. Potato Head. Go find it. Finding your Bashert is not creating the ideal, perfect, suited match for me. Finding a Bashert is not saying, I know what I need, and I'm now going to find it in the marketplace. That's Mr. Potato Head. That's creating an image, creating your own version of what it is you need, and then you go out there and you can't find it. Well, it could well be the reason why you can't find it is because that's not your Bashert. And it could well be that that's not what you need. And it could be with your vast acumen, with your brilliant understanding of the very nature of the human, and exactly what it is that you need, and exactly where you'll be 20 years from now, that you blew it, and you don't have a clue. And I believe that if you play Mr. Potato Head, you are destined to fail. And more than that, I don't believe that that's the way the Torah wants us going out. There is a system called the Bashert system. And there is a system for going out. And really it's quite simple. It's comprised of two parts. The first part is similar to the way most people do it. It's what I call the paper test. The paper test is you look and you analyze before there's any emotional connection, before there's any involvement. You look and you ask the questions, are we in the same ballpark? Are we headed in the same direction in life? Are we looking for the same things? You do a test on paper to see if the two are compatible. You also look for things like psychological stability and various things. You make sure that on paper it's a match. Then you take the Bashert test. Now folks, again, the lightning bug and lightning are vastly different. The Bashert test means one simple thing. You go out on a date to see, is this the person who is predestined for me? Is this the person that Hashem chose for me? Not is this the person who I want to spend the rest of my life with? Not is this the person best suited for me? Is this the person that Hashem chose for me? And you'll say, well, how do I know that one? I'm not a Navi. The answer is there is a very, very real way that you'll know exactly that answer, because Hashem designed you with the ability to know that answer. There's a certain comfort level, a certain just sort of, it feels right. I don't know, it just sort of clicks. Not rockets on the 4th of July, not mad love, wow, I'm gone, I'm la la land. Just, it's sort of, I don't know, it just sort of works. It just sort of clicks. It just sort of feels right. I look forward to the dates. I enjoy her company. He seems like a really good person. It just sort of works. And that is the Bashert test. You see, the Bashert test is understanding that Hashem chose for me a person before I was born, and Hashem gave me the intuition and ability to find that person. And the way you find that person is, first you do the paper test, and make sure that they're holding the same place in life, and then you go out and see, is it a match? Is it a match means, is there a comfort level? Does it just sort of click? Does it just sort of work? I just feel right about it. And that is the Bashert test. And folks, if you listen to the way people talk, they don't speak that way. I've heard so many dates dropped because, I don't know, I just didn't hear anything exciting about the guy. But what did you hear about the guy? He's a good guy, very responsible, but I wasn't excited. Before they even go out. Before, my wife just told me about someone she knows very well. The girl has not gone out in a year and a half. She has not gone out with a single guy in a year and a half. They read a shidduch of a guy. On paper, he was great. Everything was perfect. She doesn't want to go out with him. Why not? She's very quiet, and she wants to lay with the guy. She wants an extroverted guy to bring her out, and she's not interested in this guy. How do you know what you need? I don't mean to be rude over here, but are you the grand psychologist? Are you the brilliant understander of the human? You know what your life is going to be like in 15 and 20 years. You understand what you need to be mashlim you, that you're not going to go out with somebody who's not the type that you need. And I believe, while it may sound funny, I believe that's far more common than people admit to. And the basic approach is relying on something called intuition. And I want to explain to you that intuition is not something that's dumbed down. You know, a lot of people take this attitude, if it's not cognitively solid, if my rational thought process doesn't buy into it, it's got to be wrong. There are quite a number of books written now about working intuition. Want to hear an interesting story? A fireman goes into a burning house. He is the lead of the crew, and they're putting out this house fire, and something's wrong because they're dousing the fire with water, and the fire goes out, but then comes back up. It goes out and comes back up. And he doesn't understand why, and to this day he can't say why, but he yells out a command to the crew, everyone evacuate, get out now! And they all run out, The minute they get to the street, the entire house collapsed. What had happened was, unbeknownst to him and the rest of the crew, the fire that they were fighting was not the real fire. The real fire had begun in the basement, and the fire was raging underneath. The reason why when they would douse the fire with water it wouldn't go out was because they were extinguishing the fire here, but the source of heat was in the basement. His conscious mind didn't understand that, but there was something in the picture that didn't add up, there was something wrong, and his every instinct in his body said, run, get out of here, and that's exactly what he did. If you read the book Blink by Maxwell, you'll see that there's a tremendous capacity of intuition. And scientists will explain to you the koach called intuition is based on one simple observation. My conscious mind can process about 4,000 bits of information a second. My subconscious mind can process 4 billion bits of information per second. You see, the conscious mind is but the tip of the iceberg. The subconscious mind is brilliant and taking in everything and is able to create entire images and understandings that the conscious mind doesn't understand. You ever get the impression about somebody who's a liar? I don't know why it is. I get the sense he's lying to me. Would you like to know? I don't know who came up with this understanding, but basically the study shows as follows. If you ask me a question and it's a truthful response that I'm going to give to you, I respond. If you ask me a question and I'm going to lie, there's a nanosecond, a hairbreadth of a second, where I have to process the information, think and say, this is the truth, but I want to lie. And your conscious mind will never pick up that nanosecond of hesitation, but your subconscious does. And sometimes when a person responds to you, you don't know why, but there's a certain way that the person's standing, a certain hesitation. Your conscious mind doesn't pick it up, your subconscious mind does, and that's called intuition. I've often said this, and I'm not embarrassed to say it. My wife is far smarter than I. It takes me an hour, sometimes a week, to read a person, and in an instant my wife will read and say, this is the person, good, bad, or otherwise. And the reason for that is because I, being trained in yeshiva, have been, been hypnotized with this thought process. You got a cognitive thought, it has to be conscious, you have to be able to present rationales and reasons. And my wife doesn't have any of that baggage. She has a feeling, a sense, an intuition, and she'll read it. But folks, intuition is not something that just happens to be. It's a koach, a force that Hashem gave us to use. And one of the greatest uses of intuition is when you're going out. When you take the Bashert test. That test is a very simple test to discover, is this the person? And the intuition is, if it feels right, it just sort of seems to work, that is the person destined for you. However, oftentimes the system doesn't work. Many times it'll be the guy, many times a woman, who'll say, yeah, she's intelligent enough for me, but she's pretty enough for me, but she's worldly enough for me, but, and it'll explain to you what he's looking for. And folks, I want you to hear very well what I'm saying. It's not that he doesn't have an intuitive sense, he does, but he doesn't like what his intuition's telling him. You see, his intuition may very well be telling him that this is the right person. But his image in his mind, or what is he going to tell the guys, or how proud or whatever is he going to be of this person, is not allowing him to give in to his intuition. And if you would like to proceed, when I consider the Torah approach, the wise approach to going out, there's only one single criteria, and that is, what do my instincts, what does my heart tell me? Forget the brilliance, forget what I need, forget where I'm going to be. What do I feel? And if the answer is yes, then that's it. And of course, many a person is going to say to me after, so Rabbi, you mean I should just settle? I just settle? And the answer is yes, you should settle for that which was predetermined by God for your best. You see, if settling means Mr. Potato Head, I've designed the ideal, perfect match for me, and I'm settling because this person doesn't match my Mr. Potato Head, then you're right, you're settling. But that's not the way to go about it. The way to go about it is understand that Hashem knows better than I. Hashem understands far better than I do. And Hashem has predetermined the right person. And I'm settling for what God has chosen for me. And that is a very, very different approach than commonly heard. and I believe, again, it's about as different as lightning to lightning bug, and I believe that this system is the way Hashem wants us to proceed, and it works. However, the title of today's Shmuz was Finding and Keeping a Bashert. Because finding is the first part, keeping is the second part. And there is another corollary part to this, and that's keeping a Bashert. And I'd like to share with you a very interesting story that I was involved in a number of years ago. I was involved with a couple that were headed in a very, very bad direction. They had not been married long, but it was really not looking very, very good at all. I brought them to one Rav, it didn't work at all. Finally, I brought them to my Rebbe, to the Shiva, and it was basically one meeting with the Shiva that changed the direction. The Shiva met with her for about 45 minutes, then met with him for about 45 minutes, and the direction of that marriage changed. They're now married, this is some now maybe more than 15 years later. They have many children, very, very successfully married. You might be curious as to what was the wonder and secret that the Shiva either revealed or told them, or Kabbalistic bracha. I'll share with you exactly what it was. The Shiva brought in the woman, and all the Shiva did was listen from what she was saying as to what was going on. The Shiva knew the guy somewhat, but he wanted to hear from her what was going on in the marriage. And basically, the Shiva listened, and he picked up something from what she was saying, and he said very little to her. And he asked her to leave. And the Shiva asked the husband to come in, and the Shiva also said very little, allowed the husband to talk, but he said a few times the following comment: "Very chashuv girl. Very, very chashuv. I'm very impressed." A few times during the conversation, he said that expression, and that changed the direction of the marriage. And I'll explain to you why. This fella held of himself, maybe held of himself a tad too much. And as most people, he woke up at some point in his marriage and said, "I made the biggest mistake in my life. I married this person, and she's not good enough for me. She really is not my Bashert. I made a blunder." And the Shiva picked up on the fact that there was a lack of respect from him to his wife. And all it took was a couple of subtle lines. If my Rebbe says that he really holds of this woman, he thinks she's a very chashuv girl, obviously I must have misread her. And at that point in his mind, the story changed, and it radically changed the entire course of their marriage. Folks, here's the point. I guarantee, at some point, if you're like most people, whether it be 2 days after the chuppah, 2 months, or 2 years, you're going to wake up and say the words, "What blunder did I get myself into? I made the biggest mistake in my life. What did I do? What was I thinking?" And that is normal and very common. And I'll explain to you why that's normal and common. Marriage is not about love, Yoman V'Layla, all day. She does exactly what I want, when I want, as I want. He's so pleasing. Everything that he does is exactly in my interests and my ways. The reality is that marriage is an awful lot about work, about growth, and that's a specific point of it. You see, he has certain lacks, she has certain chesronos. Together they grow. But growth, folks, is not comfortable. Growth means getting out of your comfort zone. Growth means learning to change. Most human beings would rather die than change. And when most human beings are put into a position where they're forced to change, they find it very uncomfortable. And change and demands of being considerate, demands doing things in a different way, make them very, very uncomfortable. And it requires a tremendous chizuk to understand that this was the person destined for me. This is the right person, and the reason I'm finding it difficult is because I have to stretch, she has to grow, I have to grow, but it's my job to make this work. And folks, I want to share with you a very, very important perspective. The vast majority of getting written today are not justified. I believe very firmly that Hashem was quite good at writing shidduchim 1,000 years ago, and Hashem is still very, very good at the matchmaking game. Yet the increase in divorce has grown extraordinarily. I don't believe that sort of like Hashem got a little rusty at the game and sort of no longer is good at matching people up. Hashem used to be real good at matching the right guy with the right woman, but lately things are a little rough up there. Hashem's making mistakes. Somehow I don't think so. If you'd like to know what's really going on, the vast majority of divorces that happen today are not justified. What that means is there are occasions when it's the wrong guy for the wrong woman and it was a mistake. That is true. And sometimes it's for very good reasons. It was supposed to be a child born from that union, and that child was supposed to be, and therefore this couple had to get together even though they're mismatched. But they had to be together for a certain amount of time so that child will come into the world, and then they go their separate ways. There are such realities. And there is a reality called a mismatch. But the vast majority of gittin that are written today are not in that camp. The vast majority are based on immaturity, based on selfishness, based on inability to change. And when you understand one simple point, Hashem is the one who reads Zivugim. Hashem is the one who picked for me the very best person because this is the ideal match for me. That doesn't mean the one I'll be most comfortable with. That doesn't mean the one who will pamper to my every need. Very often that person will demand my changing, will demand my growing. But ultimately, for my betterment, that's what I need. But that requires an awful lot of bitachon. That requires an awful lot of understanding the wisdom of Hashem. It requires an awful lot of trust that God knows far better than I what I need, not just today, but 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and 20 years from now. I think there is a tremendous lesson to learn from Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu had many, many questions on Hashem. But the Tosfos Yontif says he was not Maharer Achamidosav. He didn't ask questions on Hashem, meaning he had the questions, but the question was with the humility to understand that Hashem knows better. Hashem told me Yitzhak is to be my child, then Hashem says to kill Yitzhak. I don't ask because I know that Hashem has a bigger picture than I. I have this question. There's nothing wrong with having questions on Hashem, provided that it's couched with the understanding that Hashem isn't wrong. It's my mortal lack of understanding. It's not the Rashba that's shver, it's the head that's weak. Every Tosfos, some answer the question, some Tosfos finish up with the question, but he never says the Gemara is wrong, because the understanding is that God knows far better than I, and it requires some chizik. It requires looking into the world, looking into the wisdom of the world. It requires studying the human brain. Studying that 100 billion neurons, knowing that there are infinite pathways. Yet somehow when I'm walking on the street and I see the rat, somehow the electrical neurons know to process to the memory, then to go to the part of context, and they know to go through the vast multitude of possible ways and bring back the reaction to change my physiological systems, to jump. And that's but one of the multitude of systems that Hashem created. And when you study that, when you understand that, you begin to understand that Hashem is far wiser than I. When you understand that, many, many questions that we have on Hashem fall away. Because it's not that I don't ask the questions. It's that I ask the question, but I also say Hashem knows better than I. And with that comes a very different way of going out. With that comes a Bashert system, which is not Mr. Potato Head, not creating what I need. I know exactly the type of person that I need, and I can't find it. It's having the humility to say, I don't really understand myself. I really don't understand marriage. I certainly don't understand exactly the corollary spouse that I need to match my chesronos. And it requires the humility to say, I will trust in Hashem. And when you go out, it's with the understanding I'm looking for the person I was predestined to. Not saying the words Bashert, but actually looking for that person by allowing the system to work. And then when you are married, it's having the humility to say, Hashem chose this person for me because this is the person that I need, even though it's not so comfortable today. I want to close with what I consider a very interesting story. I found out the story at the Shiva house. I was being Menachem over the son. The father died at the age of 92, and at the Shiva house was the man's wife, who was 69 years of age. And during the course of the conversations in the Shiva house, I put together the pieces of the puzzle, and I was astounded by the reality. This gentleman, who died at 92, had owned many, many businesses. But he was active well into his 80s, well into his late 80s. He was going to work at 90 years of age every single day. And as a matter of fact, 91 and 92, he was still 100% active, involved in running the various businesses that he had been running. Okay, why is that interesting? Because this person grew up in Iran, and he was a frum man growing up in Iran when it was not so simple to be frum. And he began going out when a typical person would begin going out in his 20s. And he could not find his Bashert. And I don't know exactly the conversations that he had with Hashem, but I'd imagine, Hashem, what do you want from me? I'm a religious Jew. I'm trying to serve you as the way you want, and I'm just looking for my match. He would go out with person after person into his 20s, into his late 20s, into his early 30s, and he could not find his Bashert. 32, 35, Hashem, what are you doing to me? I need a wife. I want to build a family. I'm trying to serve you. Why don't you just please help me? He wasn't 45. It wasn't until he was 45 that he finally met his wife, who at the time was 23. And now I'll explain to you why it is that he could only meet her at 45. Had he been going out with her when he was 25, she would have been about, 3 or 4 years old. Not much of a shidduch. But that was the person destined for him, and I'll explain to you why. You see, this person was not the type of person who at 60 or 70 years of age retires. You can imagine Hashem listening to the tefillahs of a 20-year-old and saying, Yingala, listen to me. Right now you're 20, you're alone, it's difficult, I understand. But you're going to be 80 years old one day. Most 80-year-old women are ready to retire. They're ready to sit in the house all day. You're going to be running around going. You don't need a woman your age. You need a woman much younger because you're going to be active until your late years. And you need a spouse who's going to be with you in your 70s, in your 80s, into your 90s. Would you rather be lonely then when it's very, very difficult? Or would you rather be lonely now as a single person? Hashem saying, Yingala, just wait. I understand. There's a plan. There's a much bigger picture. Just have a little bit of trust that there's wisdom in the process. And to me, it was a very eye-opening perspective. You see, we have many, many questions because I view the world through the keyhole. Right here, right now, Hashem is messing me up because I know exactly what I need and when I need it, and Hashem won't play along. I guess the answer to that is I don't really know exactly what I need. I don't know exactly when I need it. And one of the great fundamentals for a successful life is just enough humility to say the words, I don't know. I rely on the wisdom of Hashem. I rely that Hashem created this world, orchestrates this world, manages to maintain it without me. I believe that Hashem found for me a Bashert. I'm looking for that Bashert. I'm not creating that Bashert. I'm going out to find it. And when I find that person, I rely on Hashem to have chosen for me the right one. And I work with that premise. That understanding is very, very different than most people go out with. And that understanding ultimately brings a person success. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu grant us the wisdom and understanding